So today I will be sharing with all of you my mindfulness journey over the course of the 13-week course that I took at NUS, and as well as after that as I progressed through my life. So before I began my mindfulness journey and as I was signing up for the module, I had some expectations and goals that I wanted to achieve from the course that I would be taking. So the first goal that I wanted to achieve was that I wanted to gain greater self-awareness. I wanted to know more about my emotions, about my feelings, and where they originated from. And then the second goal that I wanted to achieve was I wanted to gain better emotional management. I wanted to be better able to understand where my emotions were coming from, and I wanted to understand how to control my emotions better. And finally, thirdly, lastly, the most important goal that I wanted to achieve was that I wanted to overcome grief. So you see, before the course started in early January, my mom passed away after a 1.5 year struggle with cancer. And so I was hoping that the mindfulness course would help me to overcome the sadness and the emotions that I was feeling, and that I would be better able to deal with the grief. And so next, I would like to lay out the challenges that I faced over the course of my mindfulness journey. So the first challenge that I faced is something that is common to many young adults in Singapore as well as around the world. And these are anxieties over my studies, the projects that I was doing, and the friends and relationships that I was having. And so there's another of the major challenges that I faced, which I just shared earlier, is that I recently lost my mother. I was in a state of constant grief. I would have occasional emotional breakdowns now and then, and I was finding it difficult to look for meaning in life because a lot of the time my thoughts were preoccupied with death and how things felt less important now that my mom was gone. And so this was one of the major challenges that I had to face over the course of the journey. And finally, we have the last challenge, which was the unexpected events, mostly due to the COVID-19 pandemic and all of the disruptions that have been caused to our lives due to the pandemic. So next, I would like to share with you some of the pitfalls that I faced over the course of my journey. So the first major pitfall that I faced was thought spirals. And so this phenomenon, I'm not sure if it's an official term, but the way I like to describe it is that my mind will get caught on a certain thought and it would amplify it until it becomes something that overwhelms me and I become unable to function properly. So for me, over the weeks that I was going through this mindfulness journey, my thought spirals were mainly due to grief and anxiety. So grief is self-explanatory. I would feel sad. Something would trigger a sad feeling in me, and this would set off a chain which would remind me of more sad events, and then I would just become overwhelmed with grief and I have to take a step back to recover. And same goes for certain anxious thoughts that I had. And then another major pitfall that I experienced was self-criticism. So I have always been a high achiever, and due to the situation that I was in, as well as uh, the emotional challenges that I was facing, my grades and my performance was suffering quite a bit. And so I had to overcome my perfectionistic streak and I had to allow myself a space to grieve. I was also facing a lack of motivation, as I shared earlier. I was finding it difficult to find meaning in what I was doing. And so this was also something that I had to overcome. And finally, the last pitfall that I faced was distractions. This pitfall is common to many young adults in Singapore as well as around the world, from electronic devices and hobbies. So one of the main problems that I was facing was that I was using these distractions to cover up the emotions that I was facing, and I was using it to kind of hide and bottle up my emotions so that I'll never have to face the negative emotions that I was having. So next, I would like to share with you the important mindfulness attitudes that I used to help me overcome these challenges and pitfalls. So the first and most important attitude, in my opinion, was awareness. I had to acknowledge the thoughts and the emotions that I was feeling over the course of the journey due to the sadness that I was feeling as well as the anxiety. So by recognizing and allowing myself to note down what thoughts and emotions I was having, I could then decide how I would want to address these thoughts and emotions. And then another important attitude was patience. And in modern society nowadays, I feel like a lot of us want the instant gratification. We want results immediately. However, mindfulness helped me to realize that change takes time. And especially when it comes to dealing with grief and sadness, which I was feeling, I realized that these emotions would not fade away quickly, that I would need to take a long time to overcome them, and that so the attitude of patience allowed me to give myself the space and the time that I needed to process my thoughts and my emotions. And finally, the last attitude that I found very important was non-judging and non-striving. So I had to remove myself from judging myself over my decreased academic performance. And this helped to improve my emotional well-being by a large amount. And also I had to stop feeling bad about feeling bad, because I realized that this would only give rise to a negative outcome, and that by treating myself with kindness and without passing judgment, I'll be better able to control my emotional state. So next, I would like to share with you the successes that I had over the course of the journey. So the first major success that I experienced was a reduction in stress. By letting go of my expectations academically as well as my emotional expectation of myself, I was able to reduce the stress that I put myself under, which went a long way in helping me deal with the emotional weight of the situation that I was in. And the next major success that I experienced was that I gained greater emotional resilience. I became better able to identify and address negative thoughts as they arose by practicing my daily meditations as well as applying mindfulness to my life. And by recognizing these thoughts early, I could also identify when I should take a break and when I was beginning to become overwhelmed, and when to give myself time to recover and recuperate before taking on the next challenge. This led to me becoming more capable of handling adverse events, especially as they came up during the pandemic and from other sources. And finally, I would like to talk about how mindfulness helped me with management of my grief. So initially, when I started the course, I thought that perhaps mindfulness would help me would help me not feel any emotion, that it would flatten the emotional pain and the grief that I was feeling. However, as I went through the course, I realized that that was not actually what mindfulness was about. Mindfulness to me was about living with the pain and the grief that I experienced and experiencing it fully and going through that emotional journey. And while going through that emotional journey, I needed to give myself space and be kind to myself and what I was feeling. And this helped me greatly in processing the emotions that I feel. And though I don't consider myself to be over that experience as much as one can get over such a painful event, I feel that the mindfulness practice that I did and I'm still doing has helped me greatly in managing my reactions as well as improving the way that I behave and stopping me from becoming overwhelmed with emotion. And so I feel that mindfulness as a general practice has improved my life in many different ways, especially to do with the journey of grief and recovery that I had over the past few months. This has been my journey in mindfulness. Thank you for listening. And I will now take some questions from the audience.
Thank you, Samuel. And while the questions may be coming in from the audience, I'd just like to ask you a couple of questions. As you mentioned that you are a high achiever, how much did your parents play a part in motivating you to be a high achiever? And did that put any pressure on you, or was it very supportive as far as you were concerned?
My parents have always encouraged me to perform to the best of my ability. And especially in early childhood, I was always able to live up to their expectations. So I would say that they did put a lot of pressure on me, and they also induced me to put pressure onto myself. So they would encourage me to score well, and I did. And so to a large extent, I would say that they were very supportive as well, but they always expected me to achieve the results that they felt I was capable of.
Okay. And did you feel happy about your results? And did you feel like you were good enough as a person?
Actually, I would say that I've never been particularly happy about my results. Though my results are excellent, I never felt that I achieved enough, and I always felt that I would move on, that I needed to go to the next bigger thing, and that nothing I did was enough.
And in retrospect now, how would you have liked things to be?
In retrospect, I would have preferred that they tell me that a certain level of achievement would be good enough, which was a conclusion that I had to come to on my own. And I would have liked them to perhaps be more encouraging when I achieved a good result, because my parents always pushed me to be better. So maybe I would have liked more encouragement to when I achieved something of something good. Yeah.
Okay. There's a question here from the audience. How do you manage your grief of the loss of your mom with applying mindfulness?
So the way that I managed it, in a sense, was that I had to feel it. So before I began practicing mindfulness, I would kind of cover my feelings and I would bottle them up. And by practicing mindfulness, I will allow myself to grieve. I'll let myself cry. I will let myself feel all the things that I was experiencing. And so that kind of helped me process it internally as well as externally. And also mindfulness helped me to recognize when I needed help and when I needed to look for others to just let it all out, to look for friends, to go to look for my family and to talk with them. And so that's how mindfulness helped me to process the grief that I was feeling.
When you said you bottle it up, did that mean that, could you describe a bit of that? And also, did you allow yourself to cry?
So the way that I bottled it up would be, as I said in my presentation, I would busy my time with distractions, like I'll use my phone all the time, and I would never give myself a single second of empty time where I could sit down and feel. And so this manifested in a negative way when the grief that was building up in the background would just explode, and then I'll just become unable to function, and I'll lie down in my bed and cry, pretty much. So mindfulness helped me to slowly release this kind of emotional pressure that I was experiencing, instead of just keeping it inside until it exploded into one big event.
Thank you. And there's a question here. What is one or two mindfulness techniques that you can share that helped you to live with the grief?
Well, first is the practice of mindfulness meditation, which was one of the key aspects in our Undefeated Mind course. So by giving yourself about a certain amount of time daily to practice mindfulness, I was able to address the thoughts that arose at the back of my mind, and then I would release them. And this helped me greatly in addressing the feelings that I was having.
Thank you. Another question here is what led to your lack of motivation, and how do you come around to that now? Or how do you overcome it?
So the lack of motivation for me stemmed from realizing that a feeling that nothing mattered, because in the end everything will go to nothing and we will die in the end. And so the way I address that now is that instead of looking all the way in the future and thinking about how I'm going to die and everybody's going to die, I take my life day to day. I just set myself small, simple goals that are easily achievable. And I also try and plan my time. So instead of living with my mind far in the future about how in 100 years we'll all be gone, I will take it that I'm alive today, and that's what matters.
Great. And one more question before we move to the next speaker. Can you share the words that your parents used to induce you to become a high achiever and supporting you at the same time?
The words that my parents used. So my parents I can't really say specific words, but my parents would always give me the resources that I needed. So if I said that I needed to upgrade my computer to do some computer science mumbo jumbo, they would bring me to the store and get me a better computer. Or that if I said I need 3 hours to study math, then they wouldn't disturb me for 3 hours. So in that regard, they were very supportive of my academic efforts. But at the same time, they always pushed me to do better, in the sense that when I achieved something, they would also always ask me, so what's next? What comes after? So if I did well on my PSLE, they would say, what school are you going to? Or if I did well or if my project was successful, then they'll say, what's the next project? And that's how I came to get this idea that one must always be pushing forward, and there's always a greater achievement to be had.
Okay. And is that what you believe in now?
What I believe in now is that indeed there is always greater achievement to be had in the world, but at the same time, one must occasionally appreciate all the things that I must appreciate all the things that I have accomplished already, and to be happy that I am in the place that I'm in now.
Thank you, Samuel. So stay on.